At 3:42 p.m. on July 17, 1944, Finnish sniper Simo Häyhä stood in a forest trench near the Kola River, peering through iron sights at Soviet positions 400 meters away. He had no telescopic scope because the glint of glass could reveal his position, and he had no spotter because working alone meant no one else would die if he was discovered. In the next 8 minutes, he would kill 8 Soviet soldiers with 8 shots, each kill recorded in the small notebook he kept in his pocket, bringing his total to 505 confirmed kills, the highest individual count of any sniper in recorded military history. But Häyhä was just one example of the extraordinary individuals and innovations that emerged from World War II's desperate circumstances. Across every theater of the war, impossible aircraft designs took flight, and individual snipers achieved kill counts that defied statistical probability, creating a collection of weapons and warriors so extreme that they seem fictional until you examine the documentary evidence. There was the German pilot who flew a rocket-powered interceptor that could reach 600 miles per hour, but only had fuel for 8 minutes of flight. The Soviet female sniper who killed 309 Germans despite being only 19 years old. The American aircraft so heavily armed it could destroy tanks from the air. The Japanese sniper who remained hidden in the Philippines for 29 years after the war ended, not knowing or refusing to believe that hostilities had ceased. These weren't propaganda fabrications or exaggerated war stories. They were documented realities, verified through military records, eyewitness accounts, and in many cases, physical evidence that survives to this day. World War II pushed human innovation and individual capability to extremes that peacetime would never demand, and that subsequent conflicts have rarely equaled, producing a collection of aircraft and snipers whose achievements seem impossible until you understand the context that created them. A global conflict where nations threw every resource and every innovation into a struggle for survival, where young men and women were asked to accomplish the impossible and sometimes succeeded, and where the boundaries of what humans and machines could achieve were rewritten in blood and fire across 6 years of total war. World War II's unprecedented scale and technological competition created conditions that accelerated aircraft development and sniper effectiveness beyond anything previously seen in warfare. The conflict began in 1939 with nations flying biplanes and ended in 1945 with jet fighters and rockets, compressing decades of normal technological development into 6 years of frantic innovation. Aircraft that were cutting edge in 1940 were obsolete by 1943, replaced by designs that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. The strategic situation forced this rapid evolution. Nations that couldn't match their enemies' technological advances faced defeat, creating Darwinian pressure where only the most effective designs survived and inferior ones were discarded regardless of investment. Germany, facing resource limitations and Allied numerical superiority, pursued radical aircraft designs that could provide tactical advantages to compensate for quantitative disadvantages, leading to the development of jet fighters, rocket interceptors, and flying wings years before other nations considered them feasible. The Soviet Union, invaded by Germany in 1941 and fighting for survival, mobilized every resource, including women snipers who proved devastatingly effective because German forces consistently underestimated female combatants. The United States, entering the war with a small military but massive industrial capacity, developed specialized aircraft for specific roles with a comprehensiveness that other nations couldn't match, creating tank busters, long-range escorts, and heavy bombers that were optimized for single purposes, rather than compromised by multi-role requirements. Sniper development followed similar paths. Nations that had dismissed sniping as outdated after World War I were forced to resurrect and improve the practice when facing enemies who employed snipers effectively, leading to better rifles, optics, training programs, and tactical doctrines. The individual snipers who emerged from these programs achieved kill counts that seem impossible until you understand they operated in target-rich environments where enemy forces often appeared in large concentrations and where opportunities for high-value shots occurred daily rather than occasionally. The impossible aircraft, 300 to 400 words. The Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet was a rocket-powered interceptor so radical that it seemed more science fiction than military aircraft. First flown in 1941, it could reach 596 miles per hour, nearly 200 miles per hour faster than any contemporary fighter, and climb to 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes, performance that wouldn't be matched until the jet age. But the Komet's extreme performance came with equally extreme limitations. Its rocket engine consumed fuel so rapidly that powered flight lasted only 8 minutes, meaning pilots had one high-speed pass at bomber formations before gliding back to base. The fuel itself was so corrosive that it dissolved human tissue on contact, and landing accidents often resulted in explosions that killed pilots. Despite these limitations, the Komet shot down approximately 16 Allied aircraft, proving that the concept worked even if the execution was too dangerous and resource-intensive for widespread deployment. The Northrop XP-79 flying ram was an American jet-powered flying wing designed specifically to ram enemy aircraft in flight, destroying them through impact, while the XP-79's reinforced structure supposedly protected its pilot. The concept was so insane that it was only seriously pursued because conventional weapons were proving inadequate against high-altitude bombers. The prototype crashed on its first flight in 1945, killing test pilot Harry Crosby, and the program was immediately cancelled. The Yokosuka MXY-7 Ohka was a Japanese rocket-powered kamikaze aircraft, essentially a manned bomb with minimal controls and no landing gear, designed to be carried by a bomber and released near Allied ships where the pilot would guide it to impact at 650 miles per hour. Over 800 were built and approximately 55 were used in combat, sinking or damaging several Allied ships but with a 100% pilot fatality rate by design. The concept embodied Japan's increasingly desperate tactical situation by 1945, where conventional attacks were failing and suicide tactics seemed like the only option remaining. Simo Häyhä's 505 confirmed kills during the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union, 1939 to 1940, remain the highest individual sniper count ever documented. He achieved this extraordinary total in approximately 100 days of combat, averaging over 5 kills per day in conditions where temperatures reached -40 degrees Fahrenheit and daylight lasted only a few hours. Häyhä used a Finnish M28-30 rifle with iron sights rather than a scope, kept snow in his mouth to avoid his breath creating visible condensation that would reveal his position, and worked alone to avoid endangering others. Soviet forces became so obsessed with killing him that they deployed counter-snipers specifically to hunt him and conducted artillery strikes on positions where he was reported operating. He was finally wounded by an explosive bullet that destroyed half his face in March 1940, but survived and lived until 2002, dying at age 96. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the Soviet sniper previously discussed in detail, achieved 309 confirmed kills as a 19-year-old volunteer, becoming the most effective female sniper in history. Vasily Zaitsev, made famous by the film Enemy at the Gates, killed 225 Germans during the Battle of Stalingrad, including 11 enemy snipers in sniper duels. His most famous engagement was a multi-day hunt with German sniper school director Major Erwin König, though historians debate whether this specific duel occurred as dramatically as portrayed. Francis Pegamagabo was a Canadian First Nations sniper who served in both World Wars, killing 378 Germans in WWII alone. Though this occurred in the previous war, his techniques and training influenced WWII sniper doctrine. Matthias Hetzenauer, an Austrian sniper serving in the Wehrmacht, killed 345 Soviet soldiers on the Eastern Front, demonstrating that exceptional snipers emerged on both sides of the conflict. These individuals weren't superhuman, but rather ordinary people who developed extraordinary skills through intensive training, constant practice, and survival in combat environments where any mistake meant immediate death. The Fairchild Republic A, 10 Thunderbolt II. Wait, that's post-World War II. The actual World War II equivalent was the Henschel HS-129, a German ground attack aircraft so heavily armed and armored that it could barely fly, equipped with a 75mm cannon that was literally a modified tank gun mounted under the fuselage. The recoil from firing this weapon was so severe that it slowed the aircraft dramatically, and the cannon could only carry 12 rounds, but it could destroy any Allied tank with a single hit. Only 870 were built because the design was so specialized it was useless for any other mission, and Germany needed multi-role aircraft as the war progressed. The Ilyushin-Zhuy L-2 Sturmovik was the Soviet answer to ground attack, produced in greater numbers than any other combat aircraft in history. 36,183 built, because Stalin considered it as essential as bread to the war effort. The Il-2 was a flying tank with 700 kilograms of armor plating protecting the engine, cockpit, and fuel tanks, making it nearly immune to small arms fire. It carried rockets, bombs, and cannon specifically designed to destroy German tanks, and German pilots called it the Black Death because Sturmoviks would appear at treetop level, destroy entire armored columns, and escape before fighters could intercept them. The casualty rate among Il-2 pilots was appalling. Many were shot down by German flak or fighters attacking from above where armor was thinnest, but the aircraft's strategic impact was immense, destroying thousands of German vehicles across the Eastern Front. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber became infamous for its screaming siren and precision bombing, but by 1943 it was obsolete and suffered terrible losses against modern fighters, demonstrating how quickly specialized designs could become liabilities as technological conditions changed. The radical aircraft and legendary snipers all faced a common problem. Their extreme specialization or exceptional individual performance couldn't overcome strategic level disadvantages. The Me-163 Komet, despite its revolutionary performance, shot down only 16 Allied aircraft because its 8-minute powered flight time was so limiting that pilots rarely had opportunities to engage targets, and the aircraft was so dangerous that it killed more Luftwaffe pilots in accidents than in combat. The program consumed resources that could have produced conventional fighters that, while less impressive individually, would have been more effective collectively. Germany's focus on wonder weapons, jets, rockets, flying bombs diverted resources from proven designs at a time when quantity mattered more than quality, reflecting Hitler's tendency to prioritize spectacular innovations over practical effectiveness. Soviet snipers like Pavlichenko and Zaitsev achieved extraordinary individual results but couldn't alter strategic outcomes. Germany invaded the Soviet Union with 3.8 million troops, and even the most effective snipers could only kill hundreds individually when millions were involved. Their value was psychological and tactical, forcing German troops to be cautious, tying down resources in counter-sniper operations, and providing propaganda victories rather than strategically decisive. The A-10's World War II predecessors faced similar limitations. Ground attack aircraft could destroy individual tanks or vehicles with great effectiveness, but couldn't destroy them faster than industrial production replaced them. The HS-129 75mm cannon could kill any tank with one shot, but Germany only produced 870 of these aircraft, while the Soviets built 58,000 T-34 tanks during the war. The mathematical reality was that specialized weapons and individual excellence, no matter how extreme, couldn't overcome industrial-scale warfare, where the nation that could produce more weapons and replace more losses would eventually win through attrition. Many of the extreme aircraft designs faced skepticism or outright rejection from military leadership before combat necessity forced their acceptance. The Me-163 program was initially dismissed as too dangerous and impractical, approved only after conventional fighters proved inadequate against high-altitude Allied bombers. Female snipers in the Soviet Union were rejected by multiple commanders who didn't believe women could handle combat stress or that sending women to the front lines was appropriate, with acceptance coming only after desperate circumstances in 1941 to 1942 forced Soviet leadership to mobilize every available resource. The A-10's ancestors were controversial because ground attack aircraft had to fly low and slow to be effective, making them vulnerable to ground fire, and many Air Force leaders preferred fighters and bombers that could operate at altitude where they were safer. The Japanese Ohka kamikaze rocket was opposed by many Japanese naval officers who considered suicide tactics both militarily ineffective because training pilots for one-way missions wasted expertise and morally reprehensible, but were overruled by leadership that saw no alternative given Japan's deteriorating strategic position. The common pattern was that extreme designs and tactics were initially rejected as too radical, dangerous, or contrary to military tradition, then accepted when conventional approaches failed, then either validated by success or abandoned when their limitations became apparent. This cycle of rejection, desperate acceptance, and eventual assessment based on results characterized how military institutions dealt with innovations that violated established doctrines but offered potential advantages in specific circumstances. The willingness to try radical approaches distinguished militaries that could adapt from those that couldn't, though distinguishing useful innovation from wasteful distraction remained difficult when outcomes weren't yet known. Training pilots for extreme aircraft and developing elite snipers required programs that pushed human capabilities to their limits. Me-163 Komet pilots underwent training that included learning to handle an aircraft that accelerated so rapidly it could cause blackouts, that had controls that became nearly useless at high speed due to aerodynamic forces, and that had to be landed as an unpowered glider, all while wearing protective gear in case the corrosive fuel leaked into the cockpit. Training accidents killed numerous pilots before combat operations even began, and the attrition rate was so high that the program was perpetually short of qualified pilots. Soviet sniper training combined marksmanship fundamentals with fieldcraft, camouflage, observation skills, and psychological preparation for killing at close range. Trainees learned to move silently, construct hides that were invisible from meters away, remain motionless for hours regardless of discomfort or environmental conditions, and calculate windage and bullet drop instinctively under stress. The training emphasized that sniping was more intellectual than physical. Patience, observation, and tactical thinking mattered more than raw shooting skill. Female snipers underwent identical training to males but faced additional challenges from instructors who doubted their capabilities and from the physical demands of carrying equipment that was designed for larger male bodies. Ground attack pilots trained for missions that were essentially controlled crashes, diving at targets at high speed, releasing weapons at dangerously low altitude, and pulling out of dives while under fire from ground defenses. The casualty rate among ground attack pilots was significantly higher than among fighter or bomber pilots because their missions required flying into concentrated defensive fire repeatedly. Training programs attempted to prepare pilots for this reality through realistic exercises, but nothing could fully replicate the psychological stress of being shot at from all directions while focusing on targeting and weapons release. The preparation for these extreme roles transformed ordinary people into specialists, capable of extraordinary performance. But the training itself was a selection mechanism that eliminated those who couldn't handle the physical and psychological demands. The extreme aircraft and legendary snipers reached their peak effectiveness in specific battles where conditions aligned perfectly with their capabilities, then encountered the limitations that prevented sustained success. The Me-163 Komet achieved its greatest success in August 1944 when it began operational service against American bomber formations, shooting down several B-17s in encounters where Allied pilots had no response to the Komet's speed and climb rate. But operational problems immediately emerged. The short-powered flight time meant pilots had to time their attacks perfectly or waste their one opportunity. The corrosive fuel caused numerous ground accidents, and Allied fighters quickly learned to attack Komets during landing when they were defenseless gliders. By February 1945, the program was effectively over, having shot down 16 Allied aircraft while losing numerous pilots to accidents and combat. Simo Häyhä reached his peak during the Winter War's most intense fighting, when Soviet forces conducted massed infantry attacks that provided target-rich environments and when Finnish defensive positions in forested terrain favored snipers over attackers. His methods, working alone, using iron sights, remaining absolutely still for hours, proved devastatingly effective until the explosive bullet wound that ended his combat career. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's peak came during the siege of Sevastopol, where German forces were concentrated in relatively small areas, and where she had mastered the urban sniping techniques that made her so effective. After her injury and evacuation in June 1942, Soviet leadership decided her propaganda value was greater than her combat value, effectively ending her killing career but beginning her role inspiring other women to join combat units. The Il-2 Sturmovik reached peak effectiveness during Operation Bagration in summer 1944 when massed Soviet air power and improved tactics allowed Sturmoviks to operate with fighter escort, reducing losses while maintaining effectiveness against German armor.